Welcome back to another tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to be looking at making a camera system like in games like FNAF, for instance. To do this, the result we're going to get is what you can currently see. We're going to be rotating between a few cameras. It's going to be very simple as far as aesthetics go, but the goal is to get something functional here. So let's get started. So, as usual, we're going to start a project in Unreal Engine 5.1 in my case. I think most of this will apply to almost any version in past 5. Just try to stick to Unreal Engine 5 just to be sure that you don't have any strange bugs for no reason. So we're going to launch that, and once it's ready, we're going to select Games, and we're going to go for... we can go first person. We can put quality to scalable, it's not that important, and we'll call it Security System. I already have one under that name, so let's say we'll call it 2 simply. So wait for the project to open. Okay, so with our project open, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder, which we'll be calling Security, and then we're going to create our new level. So inside of File, we want a new level. We'll use the basic, create, and Control S to save it, and we're going to save it in our new folder. We'll call it L. Let's call it Security Office. Now, with our new level made, we can get started. So we're going to need 2 folders. One we'll call Assets, and the other we'll call Inputs. Now, you don't have to do the inputs, but I like to keep things tidy, so we'll do that as well. So inside of Assets, we're going to need a material, which we'll call Camera. And we're going to need a render target, because we're going to be using scene captures. So inside of materials, inside textures, select render target. Make sure you don't choose the canvas, but the basic render target. Select that and say RT for render target, and we'll say camera as well. So we can save these. We need to open our render target, and we're going to put it at 1920 by 180, which is typical resolution. For the camera, we need to do one little thing, so we'll just do that now before moving forwards. We want to get a scalar parameter, and we'll call that deactivate. And then we want to get a multiply, and we're going to, I'm just double checking that I have this right. So we need to make sure that's this needs to be unlit. And that's everything. So we want to connect this to the emissive color and put the default value to 1. And then we're going to get a texture sample. And this is going to be set to our render target later. For now, we're just going to leave it as the default, but we need to change it because otherwise it'll have an error. So compile and save. And we're finished with our material. So next we can go and do our inputs. So for the inputs, we want as we'll go to our inputs, and we want a input mapping context, but we'll start with the input action. We'll call it IA, and we'll call it raise, or more like show tablet, because that's what we're going to be using it for. So for show tablet, we want to leave it as is. We don't need it to change it, and then we're going to get from here, right click, create an input mapping context, and we're going to call it IMC camera. So inside of IMC camera, keeps opening on the wrong screen, sorry about that. We have our tablet, and we want to simply save the spacebar. So we finished our inputs, all that is done. Next we're going to create our assets that we're going to need. So the different ones are going to be first a blueprint class of type actor. We're going to call it A_camera. Next, we're going to need another one, which we'll call, once again, an actor, A_tablet. One last one, this is going to be of type all class, and we're going to look for our first person character. Select it here, and we're going to call it FPS security guard. Now we're going to need two last little things, and that's the viewport. So we're going to need a few widgets. So get one widget blueprint, take the basic one, call it UMG room. Then we're going to need another one, same once again, widget blueprint, which we'll call UMG tablet. So the room is going to be the little buttons to swap between rooms on the actual tablet, and the tablet is going to be the whole interface. So to get this done as tidy as possible, we're going to start from the smallest part and build up. So we're going to start with the UMG room. So we're going to go ahead and open that. And by default, we need a canvas panel. So we add that here. That's going to be a bit big, so just to keep things more tidy and easier to look at, we'll make another one. And this other one we'll set to something like 80 by 50. And inside of that, we want an image, which will be the background. Oh, let's put that there. And for the image, we'll just make sure the anchor is set to fill. So then it just always takes the size. If we make any changes, we won't be, but just in case. We'll make it a bit gray and lower the opacity a bit, maybe a bit darker. There we go. Next, we need text, which is going to be the text we use to display which name the camera has. For the font, it should be available. We'll choose the Droid Sans. We're going to put it to 18. And what we want to do here is we also want to make it fill. But to make sure that the actual text goes below, we need to go down here and select auto wrap text. So now, for instance, we can give a test name just to see. We'll call it, for instance, cam A1. Okay, so that does work, but we go a bit outside, so I'm just going to double check. Okay, so maybe we'll make this 55 instead. So that looks a bit better. Finally, we need to add one last thing, which is a button, because we need to actually press this. Now, we don't have to do a button. We could also do it with the override functions, but I think it's a bit easier to use a button than it is to use anything else. So we're going to place the button also as an anchored fill. And for the button, we need to make sure that the color for the background is set to invisible. That way we don't see it, but we can still click on it. So we can compile and save, go to graph, and now we can start doing the logic for it. Actually, wait, one last thing. First, we need to make a quick animation, just so that we know that we're on the actual widget itself. So for the animation, we'll call it here, we'll call active. Maybe not like that. Maybe not in all caps, it's strange. Active. And we need a reference to our image, the background. So let's select that here. And we're going to add it here. So right click, image, plus we want to modify the color and opacity. So what we want to modify is simply we're going to add a new key here and add another one at 50. This is up to you, but 50 is usually okay. So let's stretch that here. We'll leave it as the gray all the way, but here in the middle, we just want to set the green to 1. So we have a kind of blinking in green. So let's see what that looks like. So if we play that. Okay, so that's fine, that'll work. Actually, no, there's a bit of an issue there because it doesn't actually remember the beginning. So let's just copy and paste. Now we have a proper blink. Okay. So now that we have our animation, we can set things up. So as far as functions go, we're going to need 2. One for the activate, one for the select, one for the deselect. So select camera, and another one we'll call deselect camera. So let's open that, and so what we need to do here is we're going to need to call an event dispatcher. So this way we don't have to get references back and forth between our 2 widgets and the actual cameras. We can just do it this way. So create a new event dispatcher and call it switch camera, and we're going to put room because we need, sorry, I'm going to call it room at the end because we're going to have 2 more, or 1 more if I'm correct, which is going to have the same or a very similar name. So just to make sure that we don't mix them up, we're going to call it room here, so we know that we're referencing the UMG room. We're going to need an input, and the input is going to be the actual UMG, so we'll call it UMG, and it is UMG underscore room, which we've made here. So select it. Now that's what we're going to call in the, so we're going to start with the select. So we're going to call it here. So drag it out and say call. And we're going to get a reference to self. Now, once we've done that, we actually need to call our animation and say, well, we're active because we've started playing. So play animation. Go. And we want to make sure that it is looping. So to make it looping, we can set the number of loops to 0. It'll mean indefinitely. And on deselect, we need to do the opposite, which means we're just going to get active and say stop animation. So we finished our first widget, if I'm correct. So that's that done. So now we can open our second one. So for the tablet, very similarly, we're going to need a canvas panel. Now, the way we're doing this is we're going to be setting the canvas panel in world space. So, sorry, not the canvas panel, but this UMG tablet in world space, which is why we're not using a scale box to scale to the screen. So to get that result, now we need to add a text box. And the text box is going to be used for the camera name. So you can put it wherever you want. We'll put it in the bottom left for now. So we'll put 1 on the alignment on the Y, so that it actually stands above. So we can put this at 0, it won't be strange. So we can put like 50 and -50. And we'll set the scale to maybe something like 60, so it's big text. We can make this bigger as well, 500 and 100, so that it fits more correctly. Make sure you set this as a variable. Actually, sorry, I just remembered something. We actually forgot to do something in the UMG room. We didn't actually do the event construct, which we need to do, and the button actually itself. So sorry about that. Let's just go back to the room. So in the room, we want to add the onClicked, and we want to call our select camera here. So let's align that. And here, what we need to do is we need to get a new variable, which will be a reference to our camera, because we need to know which camera we're talking about so that we can place it accurately. So create a new variable, and we're going to call it camera ref for reference. Search for a underscore camera for the type, because we've created it already, should be right there. Get a reference to it, and we're actually going to need to change something later. So we'll leave this for now. What we're going to do is we're going to need to, let me say, set render translation. Correct, that one, yep. So we're going to be actually positioning it inside of the tablet with the information that we give it later. We also need to, from this same reference, we're going to get a name, which we're then going to say set text for our, actually I need to make that visible, sorry. So for our camera, we're not actually all going to be calling them camera 1, obviously. So we need to call it, we'll call it text box name. And so for that, we need to say set text as well. So let's put that there. Now we're going to leave it as is because we don't have the information yet. So what we'll do actually is we'll format it because that's what we're going to be using it for later. So we're just going to say cam, and then we're going to put brackets to say that this is the text that we want to put in. So once we get our variable from here, we'll be able to plug it in and it'll be done. Okay, so with that done, go back to tablet. Sorry about that, got a bit of a mix up. Now we can add the next thing. So the next thing is we want to add a canvas panel. So the canvas panel is going to be where we place our actual buttons that we just created earlier. So for that, we want it to be alignment 1 and 1 because we're going to put it in the bottom right. So it's like that here. Put it at -50, -30. And then we're going to make it 500 by 500. So quite big. So if, for instance, here you want to add a map that you've already made, because this is not exactly something you can do on the run. Maybe you could use a render target to film from the top. That could be an option. but if you want, you can make a custom map on Photoshop or something and then put it as an image behind here and then place the cameras on top. So if that's something that you want, then you can add that yourself after. In our case, we're just going to make the 4 buttons appear. So now we can go into our graph, and inside of the graph we're going to need once again a event dispatcher, which will be called switch camera, and this one we'll call tablet to be short. Next we want a function called import cameras, and another one we'll call switch camera. So let's start with import camera. So what import camera will do is we're going to have an array here of type camera, so cameras. We're going to search for the A camera actor, and we're going to convert it to an array because we want to get a list of all the cameras on the map and transfer them to our tablet. So to do that, we'll then put a for each loop, and with a for each loop we're going to call the function create widget, and we're going to create our rooms. So UMG room. Before going any further, before I actually forgot, we need to make sure the camera reference is instance editable and exposed on spawn. So that once we compile, we can refresh this node and it will appear here. So we're going to attach that there. Next, we need to do a reroute just to make things easier to read, and we want to bind event, and we're going to bind our 2 camera switch, or switch camera room, sorry. Attach that here. Just add another reroute because we're going to have a few others. We're going to add child, sorry, we actually need a reference to our canvas panel here because this is going to be cp_map because we need to tell it to be a child of that. We can't just add it to viewport, so we need to say add child to canvas. Attach it there. Add another reroute. And finally, we want to make sure that we set the Z order to 1. Now, the reason we're setting this to 1 is if you have an image, you leave it on. If you have an image behind, you want to leave that image at 0 so that these appear on top. So for this, we want to, well, we want to say create event. And because we have no matching events, which is actually going to be switch camera, we want to say create matching event. I'm going to delete switch camera and call this one switch camera. So with that, we have our function set up. I think I messed something up, didn't I? Yeah, okay, so I made a mistake. This is not switch camera, but this is import cameras. So we'll delete this one and we will click create here, and this will be switch camera. There we go. So compile and save. And now what we want to do is we want to get another function or another variable which we'll call previous camera. So the reason we need this is that we need to disable the previous camera when we swap to a new one. So what we'll do is we'll take this to a UMG room because we're actually talking about disabling the widget. We're not talking about disabling the camera itself. We'll be doing that inside of the camera. So what we want to do is with our previous camera, we want to get it, so we can hold control. We want to check if it's actually valid, because when you do it the first time, it's not going to be valid. So if it is valid, we want to get a reference to previous camera, and we'll say deselect, like the function that we made. Get it there, and we'll put a reroute here, because if it is not valid, we don't need to do this. So like that. So next what we want to do is with our UMG, so get UMG, we want to get the camera ref that we're talking about, so the new camera we've just switched to, and we're going to be getting its name. So for the text box here, we want to say set text. Sorry, not the tooltip, we want to set text, and it's like the bottom one. And this is what we want to do. We need to get our function, our last variables here from the camera. Once they're set up, we'll come back here. So with our UMG here, we're going to set it to our previous camera, right there. And then we can call this here our new switch. Actually, we need to make sure this also takes into account the UMG. So go and add a parameter, set it to single, and we don't want it to be a camera. Actually, sorry, we do want it to be a camera. It's going to be a camera ref. So we can call this here, cool. And what we need to do is with our UMG, we're going to need to say get camera ref, and we'll apply that here. So with this inside of where we're going to bind this function, we can actually manage the turning cameras on and off. So we're done with this now. What we're going to do, well, not done, we still need to come back and add our different variables here. So you know what, let's do that first. So we'll go and set up our A camera first. So inside of A camera, we're going to go and create a few variables. So first is going to be the name, which is going to be of type text. Next, we're going to be making code, which will also be type text. So code is the one we're going to use in the room. It's going to be the value here, whereas name is going to be the one that's going to appear here. Back in camera, we want to add, I'm not sure if I use this, let me just double check. Okay, so we're going to add a variable we'll call play rate. So this is going to be, if you want the camera to rotate, you can use this. So it's going to be a type float, and we want it to be instance editable. Next, we want location on map. So this is going to be a 2D vector. And this is going to be also make sure it's visible because we want to change it based on each camera. Next, we're going to need one last variable, which is going to be default rotation. So the default rotation is for the rotation. We need to keep it as a base so that we can then move from there. So we can have this be private. We're not going to move it or touch it from elsewhere. Next, we want a component, which is going to be scene capture 2D. So the scene capture 2D, we don't need to change anything except for our basic scene capture information. So we don't want it to capture every frame. We don't want to capture on movement. We want to have always persist rendering because otherwise we get a little warning, so we can add that. We want it to be set to our RT camera. So the reason we don't want these is because there's no point in capturing all the time because you can only see one camera at a time. Unless you want to have multiple monitors, then you might need to enable these. Or if you have 5 cameras and 4 monitors, then maybe keep these disabled and just enable them when your camera is visible as well. So in event graph, because most of this is done in event graph, we don't need anything else. We can remove these two. We only need the begin play. So we're going to start by creating some functions or events, more like. So type custom event. I like to say C for custom event and then say activate camera. And so for activate camera, what we'll do is we get our scene capture and we say set capture every frame. And we're going to set that to true. Next, what we need to say is, well, we need to say another function, but we're going to make that next. So another custom event, which is going to be deactivate. There we go. Deactivate camera. And this will just be a copy paste here, but we set false. Okay, and finally 2 more ones we'll call custom event, which is CE start rotation. And another one which will be CE and stop rotation. Okay, so for the stop and start rotation, what we need is we're going to need a timeline. So we're going to add timeline, which we'll call TL rotation. And we're going to attach this to stop, sorry, not reverse. So let's see how this goes. So for rotation, we're going to open it up, and what we're going to do is we're going to add a float, and this is going to last for 60 seconds. We'll call this alpha. It's going to be 6 seconds long, and we're going to have it start at 0, go up to 1 at 1.25 if I'm correct, 1, and then we're going to add a second one at what will be 1.75, and we're going to stay at 1 So the reason is because we want it to have a kind of pause, let's say. Then we want another one. This time we'll put at -1. So, but it will be at 4.25. And we want it to be -1. Then at 4.75 again, we'll put it there and say -1. And to finish, put this at 0. So 6 and 0. So although we call this alpha, we're actually going to use a map range so that we can control it a bit more easily. So map range, and we'll call clamped. And for A, we want to say -1, for B 1, and we're going to say -30 and 30. So feel free to change this if you want something wider or shorter. Next, what we need is we'll get our default rotation. We want to break that rotation, or split it. And we want to say set actor rotation. So we can split this. X and Y remain the same, but for Z we want to add these together. And that will give us our rotation. So one last thing actually, we need to make sure that we tick the loop button here. So make sure you select that and you'll see it appear here. So now that we've done this, we can call CE start rotation. And once we deactivate, we can say CE stop rotation. Now for the play rate, we can use it here with our timeline and say set play rate to, well, play rate. Now, sorry, let me just go there. Now, by default, we're going to set play rate to 0.2 because we don't want it to be fast. If you want to make it faster or slower, then you can modify it. Well, it is visible for each camera and can be changed individually. One last thing we need to do is we need to set our location on map. Now, for the location on map, usually what I do is if it's a float, you can actually clamp the values. But for the location, you can clamp them as well, but you're limited to one vector, or one axis. So it would be both limited, but we need to keep them a bit different because our camera or our room isn't actually a square, it's a rectangle. So it has to be different on the X than on the Y. So instead of doing that, we'll do it in the construction script. So we're going to get our location, split it. And what we want to do is we will clamp the float. So for X, you want to clamp it between 40 and 460. And for the Y, we want to clamp it between 27.5 and 472.5. So attach the value there. And then we can apply it here. So there we go. With that applied, we have our clamped location. So let's just make it a bit shorter. And finally, the last thing we need to do, we also need to set up our default rotation, which is simply going to be get actor rotation. You could also put this at the begin play, it works as well. Okay, so compile and save. Our camera is now done. So let's go back into our tablet and room so we can set up the variables. So for this, we need to get our location. So we're going to get location, and we're going to look for our get location on map. Now we actually need to make a slight modification to it because we can't just put this here. It would be not correct due to the location that we place is the middle point, whereas where it places it, it's going to be the top left corner. So to avoid that, we're simply going to subtract 40 and 27.5. And with that, it will be more. Obviously, this is up to interpretation. If you don't want to do this, that's fine. But I think it's easier to, at least visually in my mind, that we place it in the center. Now for here, we want to get code. And we're going to be applying that here. And we have one last one left to do, which is the name inside of the tablet. So we're going to get that here and get name. Apply that there. And we can align it. There we go. So now if we add a camera, for instance, here, we have the option to actually, did I forget, yeah, sorry, that's my bad. We actually need to also make these visible as well, otherwise we can't name them. So now we have the name, the code, the play rate, and the location on the map. So for now, it doesn't do anything because we haven't linked anything up. So let's get to that. Next we want to open is our tablet. So not the widget, but the actual tablet itself. So we can close these. We're not going to be needing them anymore normally. Camera as well. So inside of the tablet, we need a reference to our UMG tablet. So as UMG tablet, which we'll call UMG tablet right there. Select it. Next, we want a reference to our previous camera as well. But this time we're talking about the actual A camera and not the room. Choice like that. And we're going to need a dynamic material instance. So let's get that. So material instance. So if I think it's dynamic that we're looking for. Yeah, so that's the one. So make sure you do select that it's material instance dynamic. Okay, so here we're gonna have a few functions, but let's start with the actual components. So for the components, the first one we want is a static mesh, which if I'm correct is going to be a simple, actually, let's get a plane simply instead. So get a plane and we'll call it tablet. Now for the material, I suggest put in something a bit darker. So we're going to put clear coat black. Next we want a widget. So this is how we're going to put it in world space. So make sure you select that. We want to make it attached to the default, not make root. So as far as coordinates go, because we actually need to make a few modifications for the tablet, let's go and do that. So for the tablet, we want it to be 12.5 here. We want it to be 0, 0, and then we want it to be 0.25 on the X, 0.4 on the Y, and 1 on the Z, because it doesn't really change too much. So this is just so that we can rotate it easier when we have it in the player character. For the widget, we need to make a few changes, so we're going to actually rename that to camera HUD, we'll say. So for the widget, we want it to be also 12.5. We want it to be 1 on the Z because we want to make sure it's above so we can properly see it. For the size, we need it to be, sorry, for the rotation first, we want it to be 90 on the Y and 180 on the Z. So the reason for this, I don't know why, but it's rotated when you actually don't change this, as in it will be not aligned correctly for some reason, not sure. For the rest, we need to actually tell it, well, hey, this is the widget that we're using. So we're going to tell it to use tablets. And make sure you put it as a size to 1920 by 180. And finally, we need to change the scale, because otherwise, currently right now, I think it's a bit too big. So we need to change that. So for the scale, we're going to put 0.018 on the X, and pretty much the same on the Y and the Z. So this is what I found to be best for it to actually fit on the thing. Now, if you want to make it slightly bigger, slightly smaller, that's fine, it's not a problem. Next one we want is one more plane, which should be identical to this one, which is going to be the actual camera that we see. So let's go ahead and duplicate that. So this one will be, we'll call it camera footage. So for camera footage, we want the same thing, but we want the Z to be 0.345. We want it to be 0.954. We want it, that's what I found was perfect height-wise for this. And we want it to be 0.2 on the Y. And we want it to be 1. Now instead here, we want it to be 90 on the yaw, or Z. So pretty much this is what we're going to see here. So we can change this to M camera. There we go. So as you can see, the text box pretty much appears where we put it in the widget. And that's the goal of doing it this way. So we've also set it up with our camera. So now that we have our components, we can go into our event graph. Oh, actually, we'll do construction script first. So we want to get a reference to camera footage here. And we want to say create dynamic material instance. Get our reference to the material instance here and promote it. And with that, we're going to say set material for the camera footage. And we're going to set it well to our variable that we just made. So like that. Attach this to the construct script. For the source material, we need to make sure that we select our camera, like that. So the reason we're doing this is that it's a material instance, and then we can modify it later with the actual cameras once we swap. So let's go into our event graph and start setting that up. So let me just check something first. Okay, so all we're going to need is the event begin play. We're going to start by getting a reference to our tablet here. So to do that, we need a camera HUD, or our camera HUD. And as this isn't actually a widget itself yet, so first what we need to do is get a widget. So this will give us the actual user interface that we're looking for, the UMG. So we can then cast this to UMG tablet, and we can then promote that to our variable here. And obviously with that, we can now bind our event that we created earlier, which was called switch camera tablet. So bind that here, create event, and for the create event, we'll actually make a custom event this time, which we'll call CE_swap camera. So remember that this time it's referencing the actual camera itself that we made here directly. So now what we want to do with this saved, we want to actually call our import function. So to do that, we want to get all actors of class, and we're looking for our A camera. We then want to call our as tablet and say import camera. So what this will do is, well, it's going to get all the cameras and create all the rooms on the screen that we need. So let's just put a few reroutes, because we're going to need this after in a for each loop. So let's do that, for each loop. So the for each loop we're going to be using is for the render target. So what we're going to do is, actually no, sorry, we don't need this. This isn't actually necessary anymore, because I changed up what we were doing today. So next we only need to call a function, but we haven't made that yet, so we're going to do that. We're going to call activate default. So this is just pretty much going to set up the first camera. So call that here. There we go. So for activate default, what we're going to do is we're going to get our UMG tablet here. We want to get our CP map. And in this case, make sure if you have an image, the image will likely be in index 0. So what we want to do here is get child at. And child at works for 0 here because we don't have an image. But if you have an image, you need to change this to 1. So we're going to cast to room. And with UMG room, we can then say select this camera. So this is just going to pretty much select the first camera in the widget we have. And what we'll do here is we will then get camera ref, and the camera ref will simply be used to set previous. So because we always have to have a camera activated when this tablet is visible, so we have to do it this way. So we want to reroute, and we're then going to say CE activate camera. And finally, we can get our scene capture. So select any one of these, it works. And we want to get our texture target. And we're going to call it here and say from our dynamic material instance, we're going to say set texture parameter value. Now, if I remember correctly, it's simply render target. I'm going to make sure, just because we don't want to have a bug that we don't know where it's coming from. So inside of assets again, we haven't actually renamed it, so that's very good. So convert it to a parameter, and we'll call it render target. So that's file. So apply this material, save, and there we go. So with that, we've activated our default. Next, what we want to do is we'll call a function called update camera. So update camera. Now update camera is going to be going to take in a camera, so new camera, and it's going to be of type a camera. Now what we need here is we'll get a reference to previous camera again, get converted validated. We'll make sure it exists. If it does exist, we want to do CE deactivate. If it doesn't exist, which it never should, so we're not going to do anything, we want to get our new camera here, new camera, and we're going to apply it to our previous one, and then we're going to say activate camera. Let's apply that here. So that's done. So this will be called when we actually change our camera in our CE swap here. But we're just getting the other ones done first. So next one we need to do is two more functions, which are going to be cam off, which is a very simple function. We're going to get our dynamic material and we're going to say set scalar parameter value. So this is just so we turn the camera on and off when we actually flip through. So we'll call deactivate, leave it at 0, and now we're going to do what we can duplicate this and we'll call camera on. So for camera on, we put the value to 1. So with that, now we just need to finish our event graph with the swap. Let's do that. Event graph. And for the swap, what we want first is we're going to say cam off. Sorry, not on. We want off first. We want to turn the camera off. With the camera off, we'll then say update camera, which is a function we made here, which will update the information in it and change our previous, etc. Then we want to call a delay. So remember that the camera is off now, we can't see it. So we'll put a delay of 0.1 and we'll then say cam on. Now with cam on, everything's visible once again and we are finished with our tablet. So the last thing to do is we need to set this all up by using our player character. So open the player character. And inside of the player character, we don't have much to do. We just need one variable, which will be if the tablet's visible. So is tablet visible. So by default false, leave it as is. We actually need to add one last thing, which is a child actor, which are going to be attached into our first person camera. So this is going to be our tablet itself. So make sure in the child actor class, we choose a tablet. So it should appear like that. And the reason we have it there is so that we can then flip it up. So as far as position goes, make sure that you have it at 20, minus 125, sorry, minus 12.5, sorry, not 125. And we want it to be at minus 35 of an angle so that it's not visible when we play. So otherwise we have a bit of a strange thing if we have a camera looking at us all the time. So next what I want to do is we're going to need to... So in the event graph, what we need to do first is we're going to get our player controller. And we need to add our inputs that we made here. So get enhanced input. And we're going to call add mapping context. I'm going to add our mapping context that we made, which is camera. One other thing we need to do from the player controller is we're going to need to make sure that we can see our mouse. So show mouse cursor, sorry, set show mouse cursor. And for set show mouse cursor, we want to put it to true, but we also want to set our input mode to game and UI. You could just leave this as just UI, but we need the spacebar from the actual inputs that we made to be used here. So we need to have game and UI. So next we need to do our tablet. Pretty much we just need to show our tablet is what we're trying to do here. So we want to have a call to our IA underscore show tablet. And what we'll do on start, we'll put a branch and we'll say if tablet is visible, we want to show it. If tablet is not, then we want to hide it. So that's where we need our two other functions here, which is going to be custom event CE raise tablet, and another one which will be CE hide or lower tablet. And this is going to be linked to a timeline. So timeline TL underscore tablet. So play and reverse. Because if we do it while it's moving, we want to be able to reverse it while it's moving, not wait until the end. So we can open it up, and this one is going to be a lot simpler. It's going to be 0.2 seconds. It's going to be float, and it's going to be alpha again. And it's going to simply be 0, 0, and 0.2 and 1. Press F if you want to see it in full screen. So that's all we need there. You can close it. There's nothing else we need to touch. And what we want to do is we want to get our tablet and set relative rotation. So for set relative rotation, we're going to use a rotation lerp rotator. Apply it there. And for the lerp, what we're going to do is 0, minus 35, and 90. So it's right in front of us, straight up. So next we want a switch here, which we'll leave on the finish. And the reason is just to say, is tablet visible? Yes. And it's not visible once we go backwards. So finally, what we need is, now we need to call CE lower. If it's visible, we lower it. If it's not visible, then we show it. Raise the tab. So with that, we should be done. Everything should function properly. The only issue we'll have here is that we haven't set up a camera yet, so we'll just quickly do that. So first, we also need to change our game mode. So I'm going to put the base game mode, if I remember well. Sorry, we'll put the first person, and we'll change the FPS with our FPS security guard. So next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a real quick level so that we have multiple cameras visible, so we can test it. So let's just make 4 different rooms. We'll just rotate it 90 degrees. And in each of them, we're going to add a static mesh, which will be, there we go. I'm going to change it to a chamfer cube. Chamfer cube, there we go. And the material will change. So we'll just say red here, for instance. And just add in red. We'll duplicate it. And we'll put this one as blue, for instance. Next one we can put green. We have a green, yep. And let's say the final one, what colors do we have? We already have blue, can't do that. Do we have a yellow? So do we have pink maybe? Let's see. So we'll use alias reference, which is pretty much pink. So what we need to do now is our cameras. Let's go and add those. Let's have it like this. Just make sure that it's actually looking at it, but it's not very useful. So we'll call this one, let's say, pink room. We'll call it A1. Then we'll make a duplicate, which we'll call the red room. Call it A2. And we'll do the same thing here with, let's say, A3, and it will be blue room. Blue room. And the last one we'll need is this one right here. And we'll put the actual thing a bit lower. So we'll rotate it a bit. Actually, that looks a bit rubbish. Let's just put these back to 0. We'll rotate you like that and lower the camera. And this one is the green room, and it is A4. Now, one thing we need to do is we need to change our locations on the map, or they'll be overlapping. So for that, I'm just going to base myself on what I made before. So we'll put this one at 200 by 200. We'll put the next one, which is A2, so the red one here, we'll put it at 50 by 200. Next, we'll put the third one, so that is A3. We'll put it at 50 by 50. And the final one, which is green room, let's just see, and you should be 200 by 50. So now if we go and play, normally everything should be functioning. Okay, maybe not like that. I don't think that's supposed to happen. So let's just go and, oh, sorry. The reason that happened is very simple, is because we collided with the actual object, so we can't have that. So we need to go into here and disable collision. So inside of these, just make sure that you put them all to no collision, not the camera HUD, that's not necessary. No collision, compile, save, and now we should just fall down. So the reason our mouse on the screen and I have to drag to move is because it's UI and game. So now if we press spacebar, camera comes up, and we can't actually press on these. So why is that? Strange. So as you can see, we can actually look at it, so it is working. Let's try and figure out why I can't actually click on the tablet. Okay, sorry, so I forgot actually something in the actual tablet itself. You need to make sure that you enable right here, receive hardware input, and that should do the trick. Sorry, so we're a bit... So if we press spacebar, it shows up, and we can click and swap between the different cameras. As you can see, the names are linked to the colors of the cube: blue room, green room, and pink room. And the cameras are moved in different locations. If we were to, let's say, take for the green camera and tell it to be, say, 500, and it will go down to 460, it will move inside the actual tablet itself to that location. Still the same camera, but just moved visually here. So with that, we've finished the actual tutorial. So thank you for watching. Although I didn't, in the showcase, I did show using a phone as well. If you'd like a second part so that we can set that up, it'll be a lot quicker than this part, then let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial or showcase. Goodbye.